These are a couple of pretty challenging readings. So generally, when you're telling somebody something, there's an underlying assumption beneath whatever you're saying, right? Whenever we're communicating, there are underlying assumptions. And I wonder if you heard, when Paul was telling Timothy, don't be ashamed of the gospel, there's an underlying assumption about shame, right? Why is that line there? Why would anyone be ashamed of the gospel? Well, Jesus was executed by the state, right, as a criminal. Paul himself was a prisoner multiple times. So the main evangelist, right, the one that we have all of these letters from, and the one from whom lots of our doctrinal understandings comes, he was a prisoner. He was imprisoned as a criminal multiple times, right? And so can you imagine, like, you're trying to follow this new faith, and the leaders of that faith have been either executed or imprisoned some multiple times, not the execution, but imprisoned multiple times, right? And then you're trying to tell people about this. Oh yeah, my guy, Jesus, who rose from the dead, turns out he died because he was put to death for blasphemy, right? Or insurrection, sedition. That's a message you might be uncomfortable sharing if you don't frame it just right? Now that's not our understanding, right? We're not super duper troubled by the fact that Jesus was executed because we believe it was unjust. We don't believe Jesus was a criminal. And we believe that the resurrection is an important part of the Christian faith and journey, but you can hear that assumption that there might be a reason to be ashamed if a faith leader is telling you, don't be ashamed, right? Does that connection make sense? And today, I think that relates to us, all of this, right? The idea that we are given a spirit of power and fear. The underlying assumption there is Timothy is afraid and doubtful, right? If Paul has to say to him, God has not given you a spirit of fear, but one of power and love and self-control, there's an assumption that maybe there's something to be afraid of, or that there is fear present. When Jesus tells the disciples, y'all are asking the wrong question, there's an assumption that there is a right question or a right way to, or a better way to understand faith, right? All of this for me points to the fact that there's a lot of doubt, which is fine. I doubt constantly. There's a misunderstanding of what faith is. There's discouragement with our lives, or the way that our church is growing or not growing, or the way that we see the world in trouble and turmoil. There's a lot of trouble in the world, and you can hear that as the assumptions beneath these texts, because it's present in the passages themselves, and it is likewise present here in our world today. There's weariness, and there's a need for peace and comfort, and there's doubt and discouragement and nervousness and don't take this the wrong way, but like a need to be polite to one another, like a priority of politeness instead of like good engagement and kindness and genuine love, right? I don't think love is always polite. I think it's always kind, right? It's always patient. We have a whole list of the attributes of love in 2 Corinthians, but it's not always nice. And we're similarly not always called to be nice and polite people. We're not called to like hang out in our comfort zones. Jesus admonishes the apostles with this parable of the unworthy servant. He said, if you came in from the fields, would you invite your servant to sit down with you and share a meal? Now, in other parts of the gospel, Jesus would say, yeah, you should do that, right? But let's take this just as it's given. Jesus said, would you expect your servant to come and sit at the table with you and eat? No, you would expect your servant to come and begin preparing your meal and maybe wash your feet if they're dirty and take care of you. That's their job. And then at the end of the day, would you give them a reward for having done their job? No, that's their job, and that's what they're supposed to do. Same with you. He then flips it on their heads. I don't imagine the disciples had a ton of servants, but you can put yourself in that place. Like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. The person is just doing their job. He says, same with you. You are called to be the servants of God, and everything you do is never enough. And that is a tall, tall order. It's a tall order. Everything we do will never be enough to earn God's favor, God's grace, and God's love. We can't earn it. It's not available for sale. The good news is that it is freely given to us. And that is what makes the tall order possible, right? We are called to a challenging life. And Jesus says all it takes is faith that is the size of a mustard seed. You don't have to increase your faith. You who are asking me, Jesus, increase our faith, they say. He says, no, it just takes a tiny amount, but it has to be real. It has to be real. And for me, the tortured metaphor of the tree uprooting and planting itself in the sea, or the mountain being moved, what that means to me is that genuine faith requires action. It is not enough for us to sit here in the pews and believe all day, right? Nothing we do is ever going to be enough, but for sure, sitting here in the pews and believing real hard is not the life that we're called to. Genuine faith is about believing that the next step I take to live the gospel in the world will make a difference, is the life that we're called to, right? Genuine faith is believing that if I want that tree to move, if that's really what I want, and that's really the next step I'm called to make, I better get out a shovel. If I want the mountain to move, maybe I need to recruit some more workers and just have that small belief that the next shovel, and then the next shovel, and then the next shovel are going to be a part of moving a mountain. In all of this challenge, the good news is always that God is with us. God is at work in our lives. Paul is able to call back to Timothy's lineage of faith, right? His presumably a support system, a community that nurtured him. We have that too. We have each other to nurture us in faith, to support us when we don't have that kernel of faith that genuinely believes that the next step will make a difference. Someone will be there encouraging us to put the shovel in the dirt, right? And as Paul says to Timothy, look, I get that you're afraid. I get why you might be ashamed, but that's not of God. That fear and that anxiety, those nerves, that tendency toward politeness, that's the human thing. And that's okay. It's valid. It's real. I don't get anxious preaching. It's not part of my lived experience. But I get anxious if I'm inviting someone to church. I do. And you won't pay me to be here, among other reasons why I'm here. We all have our things that we're good at and things that we're less good at. But it's biblical that's not how we have to be. I love this verse. God did not give you a spirit of fear, but one of power and love and self-control. The other good news among all of the good news is that in the midst of our doubt and our weariness, of our fear and anxiety, so there's the good news that God is with us, that faith is available to us, that we have a community. The other good news in the midst of all this, I think, is that we have a purpose. We have a purpose. And when you have a purpose, you're able to kind of get past or work with the anxiety and the fear, right? When you know you have a purpose, you can take the next step. Do y'all know Frozen? Do y'all know Frozen 2? There's a song I routinely quote in prayers, actually. The younger sister sings it. It's called Do the Next Right Thing. The Next Right Thing. And for me, this is such an illustration of what faith and purpose look like. In the moment in the movie, spoilers, sorry, Anna has just experienced a tragedy and she doesn't know what to do. She sings this song about just taking the next step in the dark, in the literal dark. Just take the next step, do the next right thing. She knew what her purpose was. And so she was able to channel that and sing a song about it and do the next right thing and then the next right thing and then the next right thing until she was able to fulfill her purpose. Now again, nothing we ever do will ever be enough to earn God's grace and favor, but it is available to us for free. God is always with us. God is always at work. And one of the things that will help us along the way is to notice it. So I'm going to invite David down to share your story. You can stand at Timothy's mic if you like. David, will you tell us a wow moment for you? Now, I'm just going to remind everyone that your wow moment, as we think through this theological method, doesn't have to be a high. It doesn't have to be a beautiful, good, like rays of sunshine moment. It can be a tragedy. It can be something that made you angry. It can be something that just made you think. So, David, will you share yours?
Sure. Several years ago, when I was beginning my career as an educator, I was teaching 5th grade at Adams Elementary School, which is right across the street from Normal Heights, the corner of 35th and Adams. And there was a girl in my room who came, from a single parent. She lived with her dad. The mom was never in the picture that I heard about. And I remember her name, I'm not going to share it, and she loved me. She really, really loved me. If I had my room arranged in groups of 6 for group learning, and if all 6 people at her table did the same thing, she was the one I blamed for it. She just loved me. And I recognized it, And I didn't like it about myself, but I blamed her for everything, and she didn't deserve it.
All right, so how many can relate? Have you had not just a child, right? Like a person in your life who annoyed you for maybe particular reasons, but maybe for no particular reason? Yeah. I mean, I've shared about our little foster daughter, right? Who we did not vibe, so I can place myself in your story very well. So what happened? What happened with this girl?
We were going on a field trip one day, and it was a very working class neighborhood where we couldn't get parents to volunteer to be on the field trip, and we needed extra adults. So I asked my mom to go with us. And some of you remember my mom, she's much nicer than me. And on the field trip, we were on the bus, we were going to the Museum of Man, which is now the Museum of Us. And I was standing there as all the kids got off the bus. My mom got off the bus, and she was holding hands with this girl. And at lunchtime, everyone brought a sack lunch, and my mom ate with her. They were sitting at a table together, we were having a picnic, eating together. And I talked to my mom later that day to thank her for coming, and she said, "Oh my God, what a sweet little girl. I just, what a nice girl. I bet she's one of your favorites." And I said, no, she bugs the crap out of me. She just really gets on my last nerve. And again, I really didn't like the way I felt. Keep going?
Yeah.
So at that point, as a new educator, there were several older teachers there who complained a lot. And I told myself I never wanted to be that kind of teacher that went into the teacher's lounge and said, "Oh my God, this kid did that, this kid did that." So I didn't share with my colleagues about this girl. But I saw that there was a workshop that I could attend. And I had great classroom management, there was no problem with that, it was just me and this girl. And what I learned there is if there's someone in that situation, everyone has a blind spot. And my blind spot is right field. I sat her in right field. And it changed everything. It didn't change her behavior, but it really changed my behavior.
Thank you for sharing that story. So this is the moment, right, when David learned something about himself. I think you would call that the moment, right, when you learned how to deal.
Right.
So why is it that moment that stuck out to you?
I did not like the fact that there was this girl that was being paid well to be with these students, for most of them, more hours a day than their parents were with them. And this girl was not getting the same experience as the other 35 kids. And I don't think she ever realized it because she was like a puppy. When you punish a puppy and they're right there wagging their tail, they just, they don't know that you're mad at them. I don't think, and I hope that she never realized that, but I really realized it, and it was a quality that I didn't like in myself. So
what I hear you saying is that it's the moment when you learned about yourself, whether it was the thing that triggered you, or again how to cope. So that the first step is to tell the story, and the second step of our method is to reflect on why this is a moment that stuck out to you. So this moment of learning how to deal with this one kid, right, is the moment for David, and why is because of the like dissonance within himself that he kind of learned how to address, right? Now, the next step is to imagine what an everyman, what culture would have to say about this moment. So can you reflect on that? Like what might society or culture or the average teacher, right, in your context have to say about this moment in your life?
Because I was so new, it went against everything that I learned in school, in graduate school, in my methods classes. You're going to, and I did not love her, I didn't like her. And it just went against everything that I thought I was going to be doing when I walked into a classroom. And again, I wanted to change that in myself.
Yeah. So then the next step is to imagine what God might have to say about this moment. Now I can think of, and often one way to do this is to think of a scripture that might apply, right? That might have some resonance with this moment in your own life, or for our example here, for David's life. Can you all think of a scripture that might have some bearing on this moment? I can totally think of one. Anybody have one? I'm thinking immediately of when Jesus blessed the children, right? And the apostles, the disciples, were trying to stop them from coming to Jesus. And he said, "Let the little children come to me and do not hinder them." Jesus shows great concern for the marginalized, right, in society and communities. And in that era, kids, although beloved, right? I mean, who doesn't love their children? Most people love their children. They didn't have a priority, right, in society. Women and children were considered property. And wouldn't have been encouraged to go and like approach a rabbi, themselves. I can also imagine that, right? I can also remember the story of Jesus in the temple himself, right? Wanting to learn and sitting at the feet of the teachers there. Maybe similarly eager and maybe also annoying those rabbis, right? Does anybody have any other scriptures that resonate from our Bible stories? Okay, well that's step 4. What part of step 4? One way to get to step 4, imagining what God might say, is to think about scriptures that you know, that you're familiar with, that might resonate. In your mind, David, how might God approach you? Or if it's helpful, how might God approach that girl or that situation? What can you imagine what God might say to you about it?
Be more understanding. Definitely. She was craving attention, because of the life that she led. I think that's one reason why she bonded with my mom, just because she was definitely craving female attention, which I couldn't give her, but she was definitely craving attention. And in a good way, for all the right reasons. And I learned to forgive myself for feeling the way that I did originally. And to forgive's not the right word for her, but to accept her, the way she was coming to me.
I would tend to agree. I think, for me, hearing this story, I think God's perspective might be just let's all show each other compassion, and including David, show yourself a little compassion. We're all human, we're not perfect. You're learning how to accept this child, like you took a step, to figure out how to not be annoyed all the time, so you got to know yourself a little better and showed yourself some compassion. You were able to learn to show her some compassion. Thanks be to our lineages of faith, right? David's mom gave a good counter example, right? There was a different way to encounter this little girl. Do you all have any other thoughts on what God might speak into this story? You don't have to share, but do you have thoughts? I know for me, relating this story to my own experience with our foster daughter, that was the main lesson I took away, was just prioritize compassion. And a lot of us have moments in our lives where we're annoyed, or even if it's not by a kid or another person, we're just annoyed with the line at the checkout counter or whatever. I think a 30,000-foot view, a godly view, a mindfulness view would be to just accept this is real, this is happening, my feelings are valid, and we can learn and grow and get through this, right? So then, I think you've already spoken to it, but the final step in the method is to think how we will align ourselves with God's will in this situation. Now, if we imagine that God is speaking compassion into this situation, were you, as a result, think you've already said so, but were you as a result able to have more compassion and more acceptance for yourself and this kiddo?
Definitely. And putting her so I didn't see every little thing she did, just gave her such a better experience for the hours that she was with me, and it allowed me to focus on the things that I really liked about her and give her praise that I wasn't doing before.
I love that. And as you continued in your career as an educator, were you able to put this kind of into practice more times?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that was a softball there. This is how to think about God at work in our lives. This is such a splendid example. I don't know at the time were you reflecting that like God was at work in you finding this workshop and your mom coming on the trip and things like that?
I'll tell you, I prayed about it.
Yeah, sure.
Those were years that I wasn't going to church. I was a Christmas and Easter worshiper. But I did pray about it because, again, it was something, a character trait that I didn't like.
Sure. So, pray without ceasing, y'all. In that moment, I guess, because I wouldn't have been able necessarily to recognize like your mom coming on the trip and bonding with this kid, or you coming across this workshop. I wouldn't necessarily have recognized that as the work of God. In that moment, do you think you were able to recognize that as God at work in that moment?
No.
Yeah, so this is the good thing about reflecting on these moments in our lives, is that we can recognize God at work. I would say David's mom coming on that trip and bonding with this kid, that's a God moment, right? That's God at work in the life of David and his little kid and his mom. I think even, like, again, finding this workshop that allowed you to come to a solution that works for both of you, I would say that's the work of the Holy Spirit. And to me, this is evidence. God is at work in the world. God is at work in our lives, even if we don't recognize it in the moment, which I often fail to do. We can, when we think about these moments that made a difference in our lives, if we go back and reflect, we can find the ways that God is at work. Thank you so much, David. Will you all give David a round of applause? Now, we've had a few weeks of learning the method, and I apologize, we're going to go a couple minutes over. Does this method make sense, this method of reflecting on the action of God in our literal lives, and ways to find God and ways to align ourselves through this reflection with the will of God? Does this make sense? Is this something that is helpful to you in thinking theologically about your life? I hope so, and I hope if you have questions about it, you'll come and talk to me, because when I learned it, I would call that a God moment. Me at this conference, not expecting to learn much new, and learning this method that I would put into practice with any group of Christians who wanted to learn how to share their faith ever for the rest of my life. So, we're going to get a chance again to practice around tables next week. So come eat some Hawaiian bread egg sliders at Breakfast Church, and we'll practice. There is doubt, and there is fear, and there is anxiety. We live in the human condition. It's evident in the passages that we heard today. It is evident as we move through the world. But God is with us. God has called us with a holy calling. We have a purpose. We will never have done enough. But the rest of the good news, y'all, or even more good news, is that there will never not be opportunities to practice our faith. There's a quote that's attributed to John Wesley that says, do all the good you can in all the ways you can, in all the times you can, in all the places you can, as long as you ever can. As long as you ever can. Because the hard truth is it will never be enough. There will always be more need. But also, there will always be more need. There will always be more opportunities to act in faith, to put the shovel in the dirt, to support a friend, to encourage, to be in community, to hold a little child's hand who needs love and care. There will always be opportunities to do good, and that is what we are called to. May it be so. Amen.